Jean-Baptiste Joly. He is since 1989 chairman of the board of the foundation Akademie Schloss Solitude, founding director and artistic director of the Akademie. From 1983 to 1988, he was the director of the Institut Français de Stuttgart. And he is also honorary professor at the School of Art and Weißensee College of Design, Berlin. So I give the floor to Jean-Baptiste Joly.
Thank you for these words of introduction. And first of all, thank you to Marcell for having me on the panel. Though I'm in my house, it's not obvious at all that I have the right to participate in a conference like this. And I was surprised about your questions and your curiosity about the history of the libraries of Solitude. So I prepared something. But before saying this as a kind of prolegomena, I would like to come back to what was said before by Iris and Hans. Though we have many guests and topics in common between Kunstverein and Akademie Schloss Solitude, we are not at all the same kind of institution. So Kunstverein is an association of Stuttgart with a long history. Solitude is a public foundation created by the state of Baden-Württemberg, so we have something that is pretty much close to the state, and we are hosted in a Barok castle with a clear, symmetric, monarchic, absolutist structure. And if you are dealing in a place like this, you have to speak or to have another attitude. It means that though we have many topics in common, the questions we are dealing with are similar, but we are an artist residency inviting every year between 80 and 100 artists from all over the world. They stay in the house between 3-4 months to 12 months. So they are not long enough in the house to be on a long term participating in activities like struggling with this or that, but we have a lot of very close contacts to many institutions. So when you have something like a conference like this, or last week at Dressler House, or in 2 weeks at Schauspiel, you always find Solitude fellows who are just participating, enriching, subverting. You will see this word plays an important role in my presentation. You probably know that artist residencies are a very specific form of cultural institution, and that artist residencies are not schools, they are not libraries, they are not museums, they are not theaters. They are just promoting the private life of single persons with public money, and creating every time permanently a new kind of community, hoping that the people who are part of this will get something, that the stay in a house like this will be beneficial for them. My main task is to have the people we host identifying somehow with the place. So how can they say we, meaning themselves, the fellows in the house, identifying with the institution? For this, we have developed from our experience some interesting tools, like if you are selected by a single juror, that could be a famous writer, or a famous woman artist, or a curator, or a famous architect. You have a first level of identification with the decision taken on you by somebody, I would say, like Rax Media Arts. They are our jurors for this current generation of visual artists. So the first level is this level of identification that is very strong through the person who takes the decision. The second level of identification is given by the fact that indeed we say and we respect that the time that the people spend here in this house belongs to them and not to the institution. That is a sentence that I have said probably a million times, but this is the crucial position of an artist residency. You offer to people time. And when you are selected through this selection process, becoming time, meeting in a house people who are interesting. The level of identification is very strong. So if you compare the situation in a house like this with what happened some years ago at Villa Massimo, or what happened at Villa Medici, where you have an overpressure between authority of the institution and the work of the artist, you come in critical situations that can be explosive. So we never encountered until now a situation like this. It's not excluded, but just want to emphasize that we are very aware of the difficulty of a job like this, because there is no hierarchy between the artists who are in the house and the head of the institution and the administration of the institution. And I think I never said, you were mentioning May '68, it's why I'm thinking of this. I was on the streets in Paris making my baccalaureate in this very year, and the critique of the institution somehow is a very strong part of my socialization. And in the 70s I was also spokesperson for my trade union group in the school where I was teaching. So I'm coming from the side of critique of institution, and that's how I know the tricks. So let's come back to, may I tell you about the Libraries of Solitude? The title was due to a conversation we had, Marcell and me, 2 weeks ago about what I should say today. I had something else in mind. I had in mind talking about a new project that is dealing with a new idea of library. I will mention it briefly at the end. But he said, no, I want you really to tell us the story and the anecdotes around some of the libraries of Solitude. So there are 6 libraries in Solitude. I was a little bit reluctant by doing so, because now you're more or less my age, and people this age, they are inclined to tell their memories, and I'm always afraid about doing so. But I was asked for, so I do it. So we have 6 libraries in Solitude: ABR Bibliothek, Hermann's Library, Niedlichs Refugium, the special library Art, Science and Business that is in Lotte's office, the special library that is under control of the PR department with books written or co-written by fellows, and the little director's library in my office. So I will speak about the 3 libraries, and founding a library in an artist residency, who is choosing books for whom. And when we started here, the building was under construction. It was in '89, the administrative director and me, he was a champion for thinking and preparing the future, and he made an incredibly precise list of all the equipment, furnitures, tools, devices we would need for the Academy, including easels for the painters. We had only 5 painters from 1,200 fellows, but we have, I think, 20 easels in the house. It was the same for the grand pianos. We had 13 grand pianos. Now we have microphones. Yes, now we have only 6, and we bought too many grand pianos, and it was good, because when we had to reinvest in the furniture of the house, our secret treasury were half of the pianos that we sold for a good price. And then I remember him thinking the space of the future library, and he was a wonderful person, and he was educated as a bookseller. As you know, in Germany, it used to be a very recognized profession that you had to learn to be a bookseller. So, and he was thinking immediately from his perspective of a bookshop, what would be needed for the library of the Academy. And somehow, like, we provide everything, and we know in advance the kind of books that the people who will join the house will need. I had somehow a problem with this, and I thought that the house should be, in a way, open for things that would develop in the future. And I thought also that a library that is the perfect metaphor for an art institution should also express something, that should say something about the institution itself, about its purpose, about its meaning, about its aim. And when you think about what a library should do, so I would say something like offering space for hosting the memory of the future. So the first idea was the library should grow with the fellows who are joining the house. And this is still the case today. Every fellow who joins the house has the right of suggesting 2 books. When at the beginning we were richer, we said 3 books, now it's only 2. I hope it's okay. But so the library would grow with the books selected by the fellows. But I was missing the sharp point of how do we enter, how do we found this library. And at that time in the 80s, there was probably one of the most interesting artist groups ever in Stuttgart and probably in Germany. More or less forgotten, their name is ABR, and they had a wonderful show in '86 at Kunstverein. I wrote the catalogue, Décor de la vie, a wonderful exhibition about decoration, art, superficial phenomena, and about the depth of superficial phenomena, and about situations that are created from putting together things that belong to art, not to art, to decoration, to text, etc. And so I thought asking this group of artists for creating the library could be interesting. They would think as well the decoration, the shelves, the furniture, the books. And I am so happy that one of the 3 of them is here today, and it's Harry Walter, and he had a crucial influence on the library. So the idea was to start a library as an art project. And if I told you at the beginning that a library is a metaphor for an institution, a cultural institution, you will immediately translate and transfer that an art a cultural institution could be an art project. So this is the library as it is. On top of it you read Bibliothèque Solitude, this is the name. You see the shelves with the books, and you see in the middle a collection of, at the origin, 125 books that had been selected by ABR, and those books were all bound with this motif that you see here, and this is the skyline of the books chosen by them. And we enter immediately in the topic that was mentioned by Marcell, but also by Dusan yesterday. Those books were beginning with Die vollkommene Leere, the complete void, and ending at the other end of the 120 book by Mourning about Accomplishment. So this was a collection of books, it's still a collection of books from void and chaos to complete vollendung, accomplishment. And in the middle of those 125 books, so you have 62 on one hand and 62 on the other hand, there is a book called Generateur Modell, Musterbrüter, published by ABR in 1988, that played an important role in my life, this book. And this book was exactly at the middle. This is the point of balance between chaos and order, between void and accomplishment. So as you see, we are quite close to what we were speaking about with, so you see here those 125 books. The books were all bound like this for the beginning, and this is the skyline, and this is the text, die Ordnung der Dinge, the order of things. That is a quote from this book, Musterbrüter. And if you look at the real text at the end, wenn man sich die Gesamtheit des Wissens in der Ordnung eines Archivs vorstellt, if you imagine the totality of knowledge in the order of an archive, perhaps the whole still remaining art would consist in making this archive appear in an inverted version, gestülpt, eine umgestülpte Version, as chaos or as a totally ordered non-knowledge. So this is the paradox that is staying in the center of the library. And it means that the library, the 125 books are occupying not just the backbone of the library, but it's already complete. It's from empty to full. And from this point, the gesture is given, the direction is given, and then the library can grow from the ideas of the fellows, also the ideas of the jurors. But before saying this, I have to present that it's not only about the books, not only about the shelves, but also about the whole decoration. The motif you see here is the same like in the books, and this is a motif that is taken from Man Ray. And you see the chairs that are not corresponding to any security norms in Germany with 3 legs, and same with the table. So it's creating a whole setting, and I think that this word setting corresponds very well to what ABR was doing at that time. And setting means that it appears, it is there, it creates something that is unique, and it is ending also in time. The setting has an end. I think it's a very important part. So this setting is still existing now. There is a kind of secret revival of ABR. Suddenly, 25 years after, people recognized that there was something special in Stuttgart with this group of artists. And the only things that remain from ABR is a series of posters, wonderful posters, and the only artwork that exists by ABR is the Solitude library. So for all the fellows who are here, take care, it's a wonderful piece of art. Now I show you one of the first books that was suggested by that time jury chair of the jury of the Academy, Johannes Glados. And inside of the book you have an ex libris, and so Bibliothek Solitude, Inventar 90 von 1003, angeschafft mit Boot after a wish by Johannes Glados, Juryvorsitzender, head of the jury. And I must say a few words about him. Johannes Glados was head of the museum in Mönchengladbach in the 60s and 70s and 80s. He retired very early. He was an artist himself under the name César, and I had a lot of discussions with him, and I remember one advice, and I'm looking to Iris and Hans regarding the notion of civil disobedience. He gave me one advice. If you want to be free in your decision in the first years of your time in Solitude, save enough money to have always 1 year of salary in front of you, so that you can quit any time. And I think it was quite wise. And otherwise, he was letting things going, and he didn't think that he knew better than other people. So this is for sure Bestandskatalog, the catalog of its old version. And what it says which discipline, who is the author, the title, the subtitle, in which language, where it's coming from, but it says also by whom it was wished. Here it's, I think it's Uruguayan composer who was in Solitude in '95. You see when she wanted this book to be in the library. So we are following the wishes of the fellows of the Academy during the whole time. And now, listening again to the lecture before, I was thinking about, did we forbid any books? Is there any case I should mention? And listening to you, I was remembering a story. We had in the very first year of Solitude a couple, musicians, I don't say from which country they were coming, and after a while they were massively suggesting for the Library of Solitude Scientology books. And so you are in front of something where you expect everything. You expect, but you don't expect Scientology. Hey, don't laugh, it was hard. And so my first reaction, very normal, I don't see why we should put public money on buying books of Scientology. I said this. And then they tried to make a case of it by looking for solidarity of all the fellows in the house. I remember more or less how it ended. I think that another fellow told them, well, you are here as composers for working, you work on your job and you let us in peace. We don't care about what you say about the library. So, and that's how it ended, somehow flat. Somehow we were lucky enough. And somehow it is related to what I said at the beginning about how do we create an atmosphere in a place like this where the fellows can say we, meaning also the house, and me trying, when I say we, to mean staff and not to include everybody. I must say about this notion of legal, illegal, I remember Marcell, who is one of the most famous hackers you can imagine.
That's not true.
Yeah, which is not true, but this is his reputation, false reputation. And I remember a discussion where he said, no, I don't want to make difficulties for Academy. If I am working on this and I'm using the server address, it should be good. It wouldn't be beneficial for the Academy, so I don't do it. And this is more or less the kind of relations we create, which doesn't mean that there are no confrontations and no struggle, but it's rather about debates, it's rather about discussing than about confronting different positions. And this is a project that was started in 2000 by a designer, Matthias Berke, from Vienna. And this is the Solitude in Memoriam. We don't take it personally, but I would say that around 20% of the books disappear regularly. And Matthias Berke, this designer, who was upset about this idea, was replacing the missing books by blank books carrying the title of the book that had been stolen. And this was a big mistake because this was the stolen object number 1. We saved only, I think there are 2 in the archive, and this one I found by chance in the library. And for people it was really just like, wow, this is a perfect object, and I take it. So there are no more in the libraries, they all disappeared, and I just found one. So I think I'm done for the first library, and I'm in time. Herman's library. Herman Wallace was a Black Panther member. prisoner in a prison in Alabama, in Angola. This prison was an ancient slave plantation, transformed into a prison in the 20s of the last century, and in a prison in which 100% of the inmates are Afro-Americans and 100% of the guards are white Americans. So Herman Wallace was condemned in 1967 to 5 years of jail for a bank robbery, and he met in the prison in Angola Black Panther members and became himself a Black Panther member and organized in the prison in Alabama the resistance and organized a group for single resistance regarding law and law advisors and the resistance of the collective. He, with 2 other Black Panther members, was condemned to life and solitary confinement in 1970 or 69, and he spent the rest of his life, which means 41 years, in solitary confinement until 2013. He died last year, but he was first in Angola and then he was moved to nearby New Orleans. And an artist of Solitude who was an activist. He had been chosen by our juror at that time, Harun Farouki, worked in contact with him for a long time, and she started a long exchange of letters and conversations about the house of his dreams. So from his cell, that was 9 square meters big, he was describing the house of his dreams. And Jackie Summer, this American activist, when she was in Solitude, rebuilt the cell in which he was living, made a mock-up of the house following his advices. It's something like a handbook he was making for having the house, and made an animation film about visiting this house. And this project was making indeed the case famous in Europe, in the US, through other channels than through the artistic channels. This case was very famous. It's called the Angola 3. One of them is still in prison, the last one. The one is free, Herman died, and the third one, Robert King, is still in prison. So it made the case very famous, and when we opened the show, I began correspondence with Herman Wallace, and he was very proud of Jackie taking care of him. And we created, with Jackie and the house and Jackie and me, after a while, I would say, a strong relationship made of confidence, though she had been at the beginning very confrontative with the institution, with the director, especially if you are white, European, male and over 50. It's not exactly the kind of person with which an American women activist will be immediately friendly. But at the end we had a good relation, and at that time the ABR library was growing and growing and growing, and was bursting with too many books. I would say that many of the books we had for the library were on the attic, in other shelves. They were mentioned on the list, but they were not immediately accessible. So we were thinking about another library for the fellows, for accompanying the life of the house. And at that very time, we were working together with a partner institution in Warsaw, Artist in Residence Program Ujazdowski, where Jackie had been a fellow, and where she continued working on the project, on her project together with Herman. And suddenly she came out with the idea to make a show of Herman's ideal library. It was supposed to be show, provisory show for 6 weeks, like usually in the house, having the presenting the books and having texts around. And so I immediately thought, this is the moment of founding a second library, and I will ask Jackie if she would allow that we consider this gesture of Hermann's library and ideal library to be the beginning of a second library in Solitude. So that it's not provisory, but it's something that should be settled for the time of the institution. So she agreed about this, and so this is the list we received, and this is exposed in the Kunstverein for the time of the show. This is his wonderful handwritings, and he made it Hermann's library, and as you see, it begins with the Karl Marx and Engels and Lenin, you see, and you see on under the right Panther, Enver Hoxha. As you know, he was the dictator in Albania, who was maintaining Albania in a stage of middle age for more than 50 years. And on the list there were names like Stalin and Mao Zedong and I was a little bit concerned by being a public institution and promoting something like this. And I don't know what I wanted to do. I think, if I remember well, I was not thinking about censorship, but I was thinking about pointing out that it was not obvious. And especially having a first letter exchange, and it's in the show with Jackie. I told her I have a problem with this, and she said, you know, it's his list. And when I was talking with, or sending letters to Hermann, he said, that's Jackie's piece of art. So, and then you are exactly trapped. You know, the activists saying, well, it is, you know, that's him, he's solitary confinement now for so many times, so that somehow, and I wanted to unfold the gap between Jackie, Hermann, and me, so that it's clear what we're talking about. And so this is our letter exchange. This is what you have in the show. And normally it's in the library. And the library, these are the books, the real books. And so he told me, he wrote, I was just in shock when Jackie told me you wanted to censor my library, and that I may compromise in order to have my books in the Solitude library. So that's what he wrote. And you can read, I suppose that nobody read it, and I will explain you that exactly what I was expecting, that nobody reads this letter exchange. That's so, and I told him that I maintain that Stalin is one of the major mass murderers of 20th century, and the answer is very interesting because he speaks about my feelings. So you say you did not change your mind about Stalin's crimes. Jean, what does your feelings have to do with the art labor of another? I agree you are entitled to your thinking on Stalin, and I'm most definitely not going to attempt to defend him, Franco, Churchill, and Roosevelt. So you see the rhetoric that he's moving from a dictator from the communist side to a dictator from the fascist side, involving also democratically elected politicians. The leaders of today are and were no different. So what about the murder of Iraqi people by Bush and Tony Blair? And then comes the sentence where I thought, now we have unfolded what it is about. my library is not about authors I love, it's about ideas of people, he forgot the of people who have contributed to my thought process. And for me, this sentence is the key that is exactly opening. And I was surprised that the artist, Jackie Sommel, was not putting her finger on the wound for asking, and I was surprised that he was hiding himself behind the artistic project made by Jackie. So, and then it's somehow painful because he said, I need for you to be mindful on the fact that for years I have resisted my keeper's rules of censoring my mail and my thinking. So, I was concerned. I was hoping for something that came, and when I read it again last week, I was the uncorrectable teacher I always was in my life, suggesting him absolutely to read immediately Aimé Césaire, Carnet pour un retour au pays natal, and I bought the book on Amazon, put his address, and the book was censored and kept by the guards of the... he never got it. So he never came to Aimé Césaire and Carnet pour un retour au pays natal, which I strongly recommend, again, as a teacher. So the shelves, as you see them, made of a special material that is wood panels for flowing concrete, you know, when you hold it with this. And this material was not made for being used for private purposes inside of a house full of poisonous chemistry. And in the very first days when we entered the library, we all had red eyes like rabbits. And this is very dangerous material, and we had to deconstruct the whole, to polish them on the cuts, to introduce works so that it was isolated and that we could again enter into the space without being endangered by the poisonous material. The library is still there. It's growing and growing. And you see it's the same material that was used also by the architect who made the library, Matthias Böttger, for a project he did at exactly the same time at Artist in Residence program Ujazdowski in Poland. And yes, this is the very reason why I wanted this library to be. When you are head of an institution, you have a little power. And I wanted to use my little power of naming a space by the name of somebody that we should remember. That we should remember the unjust case, that we should remember him now that he died. And for me, this library is not only a sediment of things that were done in the past. It's not only something that is related to the future of the Academy, but it's also a gesture of solidarity that is coming from a community of artists hosted in a residential artist residence program. And I think that there are some points that have to be mentioned here. Solidarity is one of them. Transparency is the second one, which means that when you take decisions like this, when you enter in a process like this, you make it transparent so that it's accessible for everybody. And by doing so, you reach a level of invisibility that you would never access to using another strategy. And I'm not totally sure that I would consider civil disobedience as a question that is on my spot. I'm more interested in something like daily subversion, the daily subversion of the artists in general, the daily subversion of the institution, the daily subversion that is comparable You probably all know Michel de Certeau, L'Invention du quotidien. There's a moment where he speaks about using architecture, he speaks about the domestic demons of daily life. And I like it very much. The domestic demons of daily life, this is everything that is, slowly but surely transforming things, subverting them, making them different of what they are today. So, and what I like when I'm using the term of subversion, that it can be the institution itself, that it's subverting its own rules. It can be the artistic practice. It can be political. It can be just daily life. How you transform a cooking recipe because you want to have it a little bit different. So this moment of permanent transformation in time with tiny movements is what I think is interesting, and what our responsibility is, and this is the fourth term I wanted to mention now, is that the responsibility is for looking and being aware of those subversions and seeing how you deal with them permanently. And seeing how you deal with these subversions permanently is, for this, the practice is debate. Debating. And my agenda every week is full of meetings with fellows debating about what they want to do, about pointing out what is painful, what is contradictory, and so on. So, and now I would like to speak about the third library, a little one, Niedlichs Refugium, and to explain, to see the library as a palimpsest that is no more readable. In Stuttgart, from the 60s to the late 90s, there was a legendary bookseller called Wendelin Niedlich, and Niedlich's bookshop was the very center of the lefty students and the no-more students movement, where you found everything. Best address in Stuttgart, and so Niedlich was becoming older and older, and he retired. I think he was around 80, and he went bankrupt. And so many people who are coming from this scene, from this generation, and also institutions, went to Niedlich to buy books. So we also went to Niedlich with 2,000 Deutschmark, and then what do you have to sell? What do you have that would be useful for our library? And he said, I have some books that I didn't want to get rid of, and somehow I love them. So that's the reason why he didn't make also so big business, because he had commodities to sell in his library, in his bookshop, that were not considered like commodities, but that were considered like, it's a sediment of time, books that I loved. And okay, he said, you give me your 2,000 Deutschmark, I give you them all. So he gave us all the books, and it's including, Dieter Roth's special edition. You have, I think we have 15 of them. It's including Formier, where I was so happy to see them already sold out books translating into German, the French Nouveau Roman, which is a history of French-German intellectual relationships in the 60s. This is just admirable. And you have also Adorno, you have also Heine, you have also Hölderlin, and some Johannes R. Becher. I don't know why he was loving him, but so. And we put this library, we built around it this vitrine, and we named it Niedlichs Refugium, and it was on the second floor in the hall, next to the door to the ABR library. And it was not allowed to be there after a while because of fire security. But in the meantime, woman designer Anja Lutz was using the surface of the library to put this sentence, challenge the increasing saturation of printed matter. What do you plan to do with this when you are done with it? And now when you see this, and it's Niedlichs Refugium, you think that, it's related to the library. Not at all. And then we had to remove the library, and we put it in Hermann's library. So it's in Hermann's library, it's Nilis Refugium, but it's about saturation of printed matter. Suddenly you have so many layers of decisions and of time that are covering each other that you lose any meaning. And you say, I like this too. Okay, so what I didn't speak about, it's the Library of the Future. We are working on the creation of the World Academy Solitude. It's a new fellowship program for digital journalism. We will define precisely the term in the next weeks, but they are corresponding exactly to the bridge builders that were mentioned yesterday by Felix Stalder. What we want to do by this is between the work of an artist, online or offline, we want to rethink the division of work in the collective production of knowledge. Who is making what, under which conditions, visible and accessible. And this is then my marketing strategy as director of an institution. I want to be the first online artist residency. So thank you for being so patient for this lecture number 25 in 4 days. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your talk. Marcell, maybe would be good to hear your reasons why you chose to include Hermann's library.
It was so uninteresting. Why did you ask me? That's what you see me.
Yeah, it was unprepared. This is unexpected. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of obvious. It's a library. And it talks quite a lot about the dreams. We had like quite few things about that piece, which were really overlapping. But then the first idea, which at the very early days of when we were like planning this was the civil disobedience and institutions were the very kind of foundation. And then, because of many reasons, we kind of made it more like one day than like the whole overall topic and subject. And it came from my kind of feeling and reflections of what I do, and I could see that there is some fear that if I do that in Akademie Schloss Solitude, because Germany is together with Iran, China, Russia, a country where the internet is quite like restricted, and then people are scared because there are like these bills and all of that. And what I told you is like I'm not like a teenager troublemaker, and you don't have to care that I will do. But I could still see that there is some fear, and then yeah, that's from that kind of feeling. My feeling, I kind of came up with that topic. And if I have to say. I don't know, maybe more conceptual, I would say that just imagine that this is kind of a fictional scenario where inside of that fictional scenario you could have another fictional scenario of a court case, and I would like to use then your testimonials as people running the institutions when they deal with the civil disobedience. Because I think that in that fictional court case, I would like also to raise some of the issues like how these court cases look like. Some of the court cases in the past were like a huge tragedies, like for example Aaron Schwartz. So some the consequences of dealing with the intellectual property today can be very, very tragic. And I'm interested in that sense also in thinking like paranoidly about that and how that would look like in a court case. At the same time, I kind of I think that it's responsible to take the position of the civil disobedience and stand for what you do so that we don't have to hide because this is the right thing to do. So in a sense, what I would like to bring is like why the court cases are always only about the material interests, where there is enough that there is a corporation which proves that there is some harm of their material interest, And then there are no other social stakeholders, like the institutions, because I think that at the moment, this kind of, let's call it civil disobedience, where you break the role of the distribution of information, you can see that almost all the social institutions would support the vision of the universal access to knowledge. So in that sense, that would be the maybe. I mean, it was quite unexpected, so I can't say more more concretely, but that would be kind of ambient in which I'm trying to think of, and that's how I see these things. Yeah. These
Just
lectures, and that's what I would like to see in a discussion also.
Just to relate what you said now with what was said by Iris and Hans about questions of copyright and legal, non-legal. Finally, we are also confronted regularly with cases like this in terms of quotations, in terms of using already existing pieces of art or transforming them, subverting them. And this is one of the reasons why we introduced some years ago law as a discipline under the disciplines of the Academy, so that we have former fellows who are specialists of copyright law and internet or authorship law and right. And we had some cases and they advise us, and I must say that it's a gray zone, and the best advice those two guys gave us was, is it for the other side worth it to sue regarding what is the trouble about? And that in many cases you just do it, you do not know if they will be informed or not informed, and it's a risk you take. And this is something that we have learned to deal with. We try to be serious with this. We know those who are making difficulties, the publishing houses and the luxury goods companies. So if you are dealing with LVMH, you should take care, because they don't step back. But we had a case where they stepped back that was presented here some years ago. Somebody using a Vuitton handbag in an art project, and she didn't give up, and at the end she won. So, but we are permanently confronted with this, and somehow this is the exact contradiction to what we prefer to have. What I like is the non-resolved cases, that you create gray zones where you have to negotiate with people, and that you have created before conditions of respect, and that make the debate possible. So, and nobody knows what would happen if the Academy is not satisfied by the work of a jury chair. Nobody would know what the Academy would do if we do not agree with the selection made by a juror. Nobody would agree if I suggest somebody to be head of the jury, but the board of the Academy refuses. We do not know, but every time we know that we have to deal with respect, and we have to inform, and we have to prepare in such a way that the good decision will be taken. I'm afraid about the transformation of everything into a contract, and I like this notion of grey zone and responsibility and respect on both sides. And this is how we try to deal, and it's much more efficient. I'm always afraid when I have to sign a contract.
Yeah, thank you for making this buffer, because now I kind of got my mind back. Something to say. The one before, maybe forget, because it was just really improvisation. I don't even know what I said.
Absolutely okay. It was absolutely okay.
Thanks. Yes. But yeah, I think that there are a few things, and that's already happened. So I think that the story from the Solitude, because what you mentioned, that symmetry and all of that, it's much more ambivalent than the story from the Kunstverein. And I think that I heard all of that. Still, there is quite a few ambivalences in what you said here, and I think that it will stay in that kind of for me in that kind of state, and I like that because it doesn't resolve, and also it reminds how hard it is even in a friendly space like here. And then if you just try to imagine this kind of problems in another layer of abstraction, that's that's kind of a good reminder. But another one is also that I felt that I got quite some power to interpret and to kind of question both of you here. And I just felt that you as a kind of a person, but also as an institution, can then give your voice, in a sense, to speak up. It's kind of not a test in a sense, but more like, again, a debate. And yeah, still we can go further with that. So I just felt that, and you mentioned that you are not always, you don't have always right to talk even in your own house or something. So yeah, that was what I was thinking about, why I invited both of the institutions to speak up.
Oh, one more thing, sorry. Yeah, we thought that we will have that we will make kind of a subversion with the digital version of Herman's library, and then so we were like, oh great, we will have Enver Hoxha studying and Mao Zedong in the digital version, which you can find. We kind of almost completed the whole list, but then we found that Enver Hoxha is in Herman's library, and also Mao Zedong, and so all of the books. Yeah, I mean, you didn't mention that.
I mentioned them, that it was the main concern at the beginning. I mentioned the 3 names.
That it was reasonable.
Yes, yes. It's already done, sir.
Yeah. No, that was for us. Like,
But so they are in the library, they're not out. This is also what
Sure.
Okay.
Well, I try to make a link between what you said about subversion and what is public, what is the law, what we're speaking about the area of interpretation and flux of structures, and then every time also in this context, and this is very surprising for me, the term universality. How to pronounce universality? Universality appears. And then from there we again jumping back into single things. At one example, the law. The question of the law. The question of the law is a double-bind question. And maybe we can understand the question of the law better in a combination with a good joke. This would be a romantic construction of the universality, something like that. And then it would again mean that there are 2 layers in the moment when you, also with a certain kind of self-irony looking on your institutional approach, when you say law, then you have to ask, at one example, also the point, for whom? Is that a law where the institution becomes itself more clever to protect as an agent their fellows? Or is the institution the one who informs the fellows about the fact when they break a law? Because then from there I would return to the question of the responsibility. Because we exist kind of structures we have to be very aware and very clear of. In the moment when we analyze our own behavior along the law as an agent for the artist, then we can readdress that. So then the institution is clearly in the responsibility to go for every copyright question the artist is erasing and bringing up. In Germany we have a term for this, it's coming from the Cologne Carnival. We have to go into the Bütt, we have to go into the position of the speaker, we have to go into the position to go to the trial. So it's a very complex thing if institution starts to speak about the law and in the same combination with subversion. Because in the moment when we speak about the law, we are not speaking about to subvert the law hidden. Then we want to have a conflict. It's very important to say as an institution, when we asking for all informations about the rights, about the gray zones, that we on the other side we have to say, then we go into the conflict and responsibility from that person who constructed a law which wants to, at one example, control artistic freedom. So for me, this is also for me something where I would make a kind of a distinction between the structures of information and knowledge. We can inform ourselves about a certain kind of a paragraph of a law, but it becomes only a structure of knowledge in this permanently negotiation along the different conflicts and dissenses when between the institution, the responsibility, etc. I can stop here, but I would say also this is for me very much connected with the question of subversion, because the institution has very much a role to deal with structures of subversion and be very careful what we get to a point of visibility, where we create positivistic knowledge, positivistic use of knowledge, and where we created this area of protections. So we are very direct and confrontal political in the Kunstverein. I would say exactly this is the gray zone we are also operating with. Mm-hmm. But from the position of the institution, I never would mix up between the position of an artist who is in the institution and the institution itself. This is what I was thinking maybe should be. I stop here.
Yeah, are you expecting an answer?
Well,
yeah. I would say your position is comparable to the critique you made yesterday night after having heard Felix Stalder. And I would say I agree with you, but I have somehow a little slightly different position.
No, it's just a comment about the libraries that you want to make it, because sometimes also that it did say yesterday about the how, not the what, or something, to thinking about the infrastructure for the future library, and something that you say that is about, when you comment about solidarity or transparency, something, when you are doing digital libraries, it's quite different, because we have not the object that you say. We have already learning, we need to. I think it's like maybe it's a pathology of the artist, not to thinking in the process that Hans mentioned now, laws, rules, border, maybe it's in the end of the whole process. In the beginning, is what kind of library we want. Because when you say the Herman or the problem with about censorship, about books before, I have a problem to delete this book. I think it's like a monument, the discussion about monument in Spain, about the Franco monument, they say. I have no problem to have the dictators is there. The thing is the opinion of the other. You put there that these people, Franco was killing everybody, this is reminding the memory. So with the books, it's the same. The Herman library, you can put whatever that it's a personal opinion. But everybody, sorry to reflect, to make the reference to Blanchot again. If every book created a community, the voice of the fellow, of the rest of the people living in the house is very important for the library. It's like how everybody can create their own library or their own collection in the reference to the physical library that we have. And I think this is very important to me, because otherwise every library is a machinery to control the knowledge or something. Also Herman wants to control us, the mechanic of the library. Everybody that is creating this kind of archive, we need to refer to Foucault again, blah, blah, blah. And for me the question is about the diversity of the opinion about this single book or this single speech that is otherwise we are talking all the time about imposition. Even if Marcell, sorry, you made the library and it's your opinion about how you wanted the thing. And I think that you create the mechanism that everybody here can say, okay, this is my collection, this is my opinion, and I put Mao Zedong, Stalin, blah, 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 but then other people can submit their opinion also about this, create another
So
library.
the library, as I explained at the beginning, is growing with the wishes expressed by the fellows, so that and somehow I said it's also a metaphor of the whole institution. It means that the history of the library is telling the history of the Academy, because it's telling who was in the house and who was wishing each book. And there are moments where you are confronted with projects from which you can imagine or decide that they should last longer than other projects, because they contribute to say something about the institution. And there are very few moments of that kind in the history of the institutions. And there are moments that are imposing themselves rather than asking you to take a decision. And Hermann's library was a decision that was imposing itself. Yes, I understand what you mean. Probably I was more anecdotic than you heard. And I am sure I didn't use the word universality because I would have had difficulties to pronounce it. But I was just explaining somehow.
No, I like it. I like it very much the process because I like it very much that the library is also a process that everybody is thinking and building. But sometimes to taking the decision, for example, even for to buy a book, maybe it's in the end because before maybe now we have the digital PDF and then we don't need to decide it, or maybe we need to decide it. But then the question is which edition, which language, which format, from where is coming the book or something like that. So in the end of the process, then somebody decided, okay, we need the book, or just the electronic book, or just this edition, or that's in Brazilian or in English.
Until now, this question didn't really appear. If somebody is offering a hard drive with thousands of books, or if we can have a useful edition of Post Capital, it's very good to be involved in the library.
It was here for years.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
I don't know where.
What I think is ultimately interesting is, and I've discussed or explained this before, is when an institution includes a work that works contrary to its way of operation, its political position, and in a way, its position, and how it can then follow up the logic that this included work creates in order to complicate its own internal functioning, but also provide the stage for this, what it includes, to continue operating outside of the institution. So making the debate around what's so conflictual continue in the public. For instance, I would think that I don't know enough about the example, but I think that Scientology is really an interesting example, given especially the history of the conflict of the German state and the Church of Scientology. That this allows for the institution to intervene in a debate where it's not fully sovereign of its own position, nor of the claim it is making, because it's others who are making claims to it. And I think this is really where institutions can assume a public function which goes beyond their full control?
Well, I prefer making public, as asked by Marcell, Hermann's library, than the case of Scientology.
Oh, I just take this as an interesting example where it's really clear that logic conflict. No, I would be also, if I were in your position, thinking similar. But it's also interesting how when the two modes of operation conflict.
I would say if we enter in such a conflict, it would be so strongly disturbing the rest of the work of the Academy and the essential work of the Academy that it would be really destructive for the institution, I would say, that we would lose our energy and we couldn't take care of what is happening in the house at the same time. I would say it's an interesting case, but it would take us outside of our main activity, that is taking care of artists and trying to make them as innocent as we try to be, to answer to your question, to make it real and to make it possible.
I have a thing to ask. I'd like to see, you see, when you say that this library is composed of books that artists wished to see in the library, I'm interested also in this other list of books they wished to steal from the library. So it would be interesting, I mean, possibly your inventory lists show that, what came in and what went out, so to say. Because you see, this is like a meta level of meeting someone. I like to go to somebody's apartment and see the books that he has. I like to see Monoscope and see what kind of shit Dusan adores. We happen to adore the same shit. It's amazing, you know. And then we meet physically. This is monumental. So to me, it would be interesting to encounter your community in these past decades as manifested through the list of stolen books, regardless of the design project from Vienna, which is very sweet.
Well, it wouldn't be that complex to make the list of the stolen books.
No, it's not complex at all. It's a question of doing another inventory because it hasn't been done for years now. But we do have the list. You can see it straight away. The book was once in the library and it's been missing. We don't do any timing. Maybe that's another idea of doing the timing when we discovered that the book is in somebody else's library. But that's what I would say would be. But we can follow up all the books that are missing.
At the very beginning of Solitude, I thought of publishing, after a couple of years, the list of books that were bought on initiative of the Fellows for the Library, and that it would tell the story of the Academy. And every year, when I think again about this, I say, no, not yet, it's too early. And it's always too early. And somehow it maintains us alive, that we always say, too early, next year. So, and that's the hope for the future of the institution. If you say you make the list, then it's fine.
Yeah, yesterday you said tomorrow. That's a slogan for a shoe factory. No, but I wanted just to add a tiny thing. It's a fact for Nike. I saw it in a shoe. You see, if you're an author of a book, there's several possible destinies or aspects of social life of your book that you're intrigued by or interested in. The worst thing that can happen to you is to be ignored, right? A sad thing is to find your book at a second-hand shop sold for €1. But the best thing that can happen to you if think about it seriously is that somebody steals your book. Yeah. I think this is the ultimate compliment you can get, and I'm sure that, especially given, I didn't want to invoke Mengele, but given the selection to get into this institution, we are dealing with better people, right? To use a shorthand, and tall, blonde, and all that. And so, for me, to be an author of a book that ended in this library, it's one aroma of one flavor of honor. But to then be in an even shorter list of books that got stolen in this place by the good people that get access, this is fucking amazing. You should tell your the authors of the stolen books this, because they would be honored, and the publishers, because that would give them a serious hint on what's really wanted from the catalog. So it's a useful list to publish, and it's something you can sell.
Thank you for the advice. Very good.
Like our blurb, stolen it.
There you go.
I suppose post-capital archive is disappeared as well.
Yeah.
That's why you didn't find it.
Daniel, respect.
But I have something to add to the...
Very quick.
Okay, because there was an issue about books that are being suggested, and I'm dealing with these suggestions, and there are a lot of books that are out of print in the meantime and very, very important, so I'm trying to track them down, and there is a limit on my budget, so I do have a digital library already, which gathered together from ARC.org. Thank you very much. All those, I mean, I've been using these platforms since 2007 or something, but this is the grey zone which I'm dealing with as well, because I want to provide the knowledge, I want to make it possible, and I really make some people happy, but how do you deal with that grey zone as a part of institution, you're the librarian, you have to take care of that, but I think we're opening up another...
Thank
Thank you.